We are pre-recording this segment on March 2nd. March 2nd is the one-year anniversary of the shocking assassination of Berta Cceres, who was a environmental and indigenous rights leader in Honduras. March 2nd of this year also marks the introduction of a bill entitled the Berta Cceres Human Rights in Honduras Act, which will be introduced or is being introduced as we speak today in the United States Congress. It calls for suspension of U.S. military and financial support to Honduran security forces. Here to talk about that with us now is Silvio Carrillo. Silvio is an award-winning journalist and multimedia creator. He's a documentary filmmaker, a photographer, and a media consultant. He was born and raised here in Washington, D.C. He is also the nephew of Berta Cceres. He has written a number of pieces for the New York Times and CNN and elsewhere. He's based in Oakland. He joins us now by telephone. Silvio, first of all, thanks for coming on the program.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Secondly, thanks for speaking up on this issue. I understand you have an upcoming editorial in the New York Times about an op-ed about the death of your aunt. Is that true?
That's true. It's out. It came out today, actually.
Oh, okay. Well, and most of all, our condolences on the loss of your aunt. What should people in this country know about Berta Cceres?
Wow, that's a big question. She had an incredible impact on a lot of people, a lot of organizations, and she helped to bring to prominence an indigenous movement that was little known here in Honduras. And she went about it in a very creative way, where she was aligning and in solidarity with other groups that were having the same issues. And so she would be invited around the world to speak. And little by little, the buzz kept growing and growing about her and her work and the issues here in Honduras about the government appropriating lands from indigenous people without their consent and beginning projects on them, energy projects on them. And this is what led to her winning the Goldman Environmental Prize, which is the Nobel for the environment. And so, you know, my aunt, she was a wonderful woman who if you heard her speak, you know, you would turn and pay attention. You wouldn't look away, because what she said was so important, and it resonated with a lot of people. And since her death, I've been embraced, and her work has been embraced by the dozens of NGOs that worked with her and the people that knew her. And so here we are today. If you look on social media today and in Congress today, as you mentioned, there is a lot of traffic because people are celebrating her work, celebrating her, and speaking up against this horrific criminal syndicate that pretends to be a government here in Honduras, and its unabashed support by the U.S. government.
Yeah, and I do want to talk about that very much. First of all, you know, I think in my heart, Berta Cceres was a hero. There's no doubt about it, and she was one of those people who not only do work that is vitally important and precious of its own merit, but who, in doing their work, they become a fulcrum for broader change, for global change, for a change in the way we view our relationship with our environment, our economic relationship with it, our political relationship with it, a change in the way we view our relationship with indigenous peoples and their rights to live in peace and safety and so on. So she to me, she was an important and beautiful figure. And the tragedy of her death is something that I think more Americans need to know about too, because I don't think very many people in this country are aware of the depth of the interrelationship between the Honduran government and military forces, and those two sometimes I think overlap quite a bit, and security forces, and the United States, who has been funding and encouraging them to the detriment, in many cases, of democracy and justice itself. I mean, that's my personal opinion, but what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, that's absolutely correct, and I think, I mean, there's many reasons why Americans, Canadians, everyone in the first world should know what's happening in Honduras, because this is ground zero. I mean, this is happening. There's some 50 odd concessions here that the government has been dealing with, and they're trying to appropriate the lands of indigenous people. But this is happening in every country around the world. Many indigenous rights and just environmental rights and human rights activists are being targeted. There was another Goldman environmental activist that was killed just last month in Mexico, and we've got the DAPL, the pipeline in North Dakota. I mean, these things are all related. This is not some weird foreign, third world thing that we shouldn't care about. I was born in the U.S. Why was I born in the U.S.? For this very same reason, because the U.S. government was supporting a military government. My parents had to leave, and so here we are again. This is completely cyclical, and it's disgusting. Like, why are we playing the same game again? Why are we using taxpayer money, U.S. taxpayer money, on corrupt governments? What's the point? They're just killing their own people and forcing them to flee to the U.S. So this whole thing is completely connected. And I could be your coworker in the U.S. Or you might be related to me in the U.S. and you might know my aunt. Like, we're all interconnected now. And as far as the Latino and the Hispanic population in the U.S., this could have been anyone's aunt. This could have been anyone's sister or mother. I mean, let's not forget she was a mother, and she had 4 beautiful children and a family that we've lost her.
Yeah, I know. And again, our sympathies very much so. And again, we're talking with Silvio Carrillo, who is a journalist and the nephew of the late Berta Cceres, activist murdered in Honduras. And I would also point out to your point, Silvio, that of course the Dakota Access Pipeline, again, indigenous people being displaced. And when you talk about concessions, these are, I assume you mean concessions to the oil companies and others. And it's important for Americans to realize of all backgrounds that this is also not a separate struggle from them, because we're also talking about many of the same companies that are fracking in New York State or Texas or other places around the country. Wise County, Texas, for example, horrific environmental problems. The people of Wise County, Texas, who are by and large, many of them, Southern white people are struggling just as much with their health and their lives as people in other parts of the world. So it is, in that sense, and I think part of your point, but correct me if I'm wrong, in that sense is absolutely one struggle. The struggle of Berta Cceres is indistinguishable from the struggle of people in upstate New York, the struggle of people.
Absolutely right.
So let's talk.
And I would just add one quick thing that,
the
Goldman Prize winner from last year, the company that she's fighting against is an American company. It's the second largest mining company in the world, and it's based in Colorado. And so, we as American citizens should not be allowing our companies and the companies that make money off of other countries to brutalize and kill and attack people who are simply trying to live their lives on the land that they know how to tend to. And we need to also stand up and speak up for those that don't have a voice.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And it's a painful subject, but I think it's also important for our guests to understand what we know about the death of Berta Cceres, because there again, I think the United States government and some of the people behind it are very much implicated. Or could you tell us a little bit about that?
Absolutely. The U.S. government is implicated. Wow.
Am I right in that? Implicated. First of all, I mean, I don't want to, lead you where you don't want to go, but my understanding of the situation is that the security forces have been implicated. The United States government has funded the security forces. When Barack Obama was president and Hillary Clinton was Secretary of State, it appeared to me, but I'm not close to it like you are, it appeared to me that a green light was given for the military to replace the elected president there and so on. But you know it much better than I, so I don't want to lead you anywhere you don't want to go. But
I mean, there's proof of that. You know, the Honduran ambassador, or the U.S. ambassador to Honduras at the time, Hugo Llorens, was sending cables back to the State Department saying they're saying that this is a legitimate coup, but it's not like a quote unquote legitimate coup. They didn't know what they were doing, you know. And then Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama were both a little concerned about what to do. They didn't know. Barack Obama gave this awkward press conference where he's saying the coup was not legal. I mean, that's weird, strange terminology. Why did that? He's a very well-spoken man. He knows language. Like, why would he use a phrase like that? Well, because he didn't want to call it a military coup, which is what it was. I mean, you know, they were involved. They helped shuttle Zelaya out of here. And then they supported them afterwards, and they continued to support these regimes. And the next government, right now, the son of the former president, Pepe Lobo, who came on after the coup, is now in jail in New York. There's another son that's also being tried for drugs. They're both, they're in jail for drugs, for drug smuggling. And there's many associates of this current government who are also, being investigated for drug trafficking and known criminal elements within the government. Yet the U.S. ambassador continues to support them and says, look, they've done fine on their human rights record. I'm sorry, there's 120 some odd activists. That's just activists alone that have been killed since 2010. How is that okay? You know, how do you sleep at night, Ambassador?
Yeah, I think that's, I think that's something Americans need to know. And apparently there were also alternative stories that they were trying to float about your aunt's death, suggesting it was something personal matter or something. But the evidence seems to strongly suggest that the security forces, which receive a lot of U.S. funding, as I understand it, were involved in her murder. Is that correct?
That's correct. There are direct links to Army intelligence trained by U.S. forces in Fort Benning and other places. At least two of the men that are in jail were linked, and then one other was head of the intelligence of the Honduran armed forces. And so, yeah, these guys were all trained by the U.S. And the evidence is there. It's been there for a while. This is no shock to us. This operation was was really could only have been pulled off if there had been special forces involvement, which means that if the Honduran army is involved, it leads directly to the Honduran government. These forces are all aligned and intertwined, and the business elite, Supreme Court, the Honduran government, the so-called president of Honduras, and the army are all very much intertwined.
Well, then what can people do in this country who are distressed about this and who recognize it to be immoral? How can people respond? I mean, we've got this bill being introduced. We know that under the Republican leadership, it's not likely to pass. We now have Donald Trump as president. Democrats don't, have a poor record on this, but the Republicans, I suppose, are, even less likely to do anything about it. How can people in this country, especially voters in this country, citizens, or anybody for that matter, help the cause of justice for Honduras and justice for Berta Cceres?
Well, I think there's a lot there, but I'll start with initially we should all educate ourselves on the work that these defenders do. I think it's important to recognize the work that they do and that they risk their lives, not just for, if I want to go to travel to Guatemala or Honduras or wherever, that there's a place for me to go and appreciate and say, look, this is something powerful that needs to survive, because if not, we're just, what are we going to leave for our children? So I think, first of all, we need to educate ourselves on the work that these people do. Secondly, the bill We didn't think we'd even get a bill introduced in the House. And here we are, we're introducing it again with, at the beginning, 25 signatures. And we're going to have a lot more than we had last time. There's a huge push. And I think the best thing you can do after educating yourself on the work that these environmental advocates, sorry, the wind is very strong here today. After you educate yourself on the work of these environmental advocates, you can press your local representative to sign on to the bill. And there is a chance that Republicans will sign on to it. I think that we've had several conversations with a few Republicans, and this has been along the lines of why are we wasting taxpayer money on giving it to this corrupt government that claims to be a legitimate government? I mean, that's the question. We should not be wasting money. And if I think that rings true for Republicans and Donald Trump especially. And so what we don't want is to cut off all aid, but we need to send a message to this government and to governments like this that living like treating your people like this and carrying on it with impunity, 95% impunity rate in this country, which means that 5% of the murders are solved or someone's arrested for them. You know, how is that? How can you have confidence that they're going to conduct an actual legitimate investigation if only 5% of the murders are actually solved here?
And we should not.
So there's a lot there,
right? Absolutely, and we should not be supporting unjust governments. Last, very quick question: Where are you right now?
I am in La Esperanza, a very windy La Esperanza, Honduras, and it's interesting. It's a dry season here, but there's a forest fire nearby here as well. So I'm a little concerned about that, which isn't too far away. But we're going to commemorate my aunt and her work. And there's hundreds of people in town that are preparing for a big commemoration tonight and tomorrow.
All right. Well, our best to you and your family, and our best to everyone there in the work that continues. And Silvio Carrillo, award-winning journalist and nephew of Berta Cceres, thank you for coming on the program.
Absolutely. Thank you very much for having me.